All right, maybe we can go ahead and get started. It looks like we have a couple folks on. Everyone, thank you for joining. My name is Lauren Worth. I'm a market research analyst here at G2. Here to talk about our new category, Risk Intelligence Software. With me is Chris Shaw from Signal AI. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here. Chris Shaw is the risk proposition owner at Signal AI. Prior to joining Signal AI, Chris was a client partner at Outsell Inc., consulting on enterprise risk management. An industry expert in media analytics, Chris has extensive experience developing innovative products and platforms for corporate reputation, PR, and multiple adjacent markets, such as asset management and equity trading, government surveillance of political propaganda, and most recently, enterprise risk. During his career, Chris co-founded 3 technology ventures with 2 exits. Chris also recently co-authored a white paper titled A Wake-Up Call for Enterprise Risk, How AI Can Transform ERM, which covers the current challenges and pain points of enterprise risk management and the market research findings we'll be discussing today.
Lauren, good to be here.
Thank you, Chris. And just to add a little more context for while we're here chatting today, Chris and Signal AI reached out to G2 about exploring creating a new category called Risk Intelligence. And in collaboration with Signal AI, we researched this emerging market and determined that we don't have great representation for this new field of risk management on G2. So again, in collaboration with them, we've decided to add a new category on G2 called Risk Intelligence, and that will be launching next week. So we're going to jump into a couple questions that we have for Chris here to root us a little bit more in what is risk intelligence, what is this new emerging market, and how it might differ from some of the other risk management platforms that we see on the market today.
Yes, thanks, Lauren. And thanks for the intro, and great to be here. An exciting new category. So risk intelligence is a new category of intelligence that really helps senior leaders at the enterprise level of an organization have the insights ready to make decisions around mitigation. Now, clearly, many companies have been using lots of data around risk from their governance, risk, and compliance platforms for a long time, and that has derived a lot of internal information. So there's a real internal perspective on risk. And what we're coming on to in terms of this broader category of risk intelligence is helping companies not just navigate the internal risks that they're facing, but also the external operating domain, because for the reasons that we'll come on to, that is something that's causing a lot of disruption to businesses for various reasons. And so the offer from Signal AI encompasses insights from the external operating domain, and we take down a lot of media, global media, and extract the signals around risks, and then ensure that our clients at an enterprise level can access those signals, and it just helps them get ahead of those risk events before they mature into an issue that's likely to disrupt their business or impact and threaten their reputation. And we very much see risk and reputation as 2 sides of the same coin that companies need to navigate in this new, more hostile world.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things for me looking at this new market is the roots in reputation management and how that has evolved into being a risk domain that enterprises need to consider when they're thinking holistically about risk to their business. As part of my work at G2, I also work with other governance, risk, and compliance categories. And we have a process whereby every couple years or so, we look at an existing category and consider whether the definition, the inclusion criteria, and the products listed in that category are still an accurate reflection of the market. And as I've been doing that with a number of our risk management categories, I'm seeing a lot more references to reputational risk across different types of risk management platforms that I really don't think was even a consideration 5-6 years ago when G2 created initially some of these risk platforms. So it's just been really interesting to see that the evolution of reputation and external risk data coming into all these different types of risk management platforms.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And we view reputation as a transversal risk, and because reputation risks can come from any issues, any events, and usually they stem from a company that's facing an operational issue that maybe has poorly responded to that issue, and it contaminates their reputation. So certainly the research that we've done identified a disconnect where those leading the reputation management strategies and tactics for a company are not necessarily connected to those leading the risk and mitigation strategies. And we feel that there's an awful lot of value for enterprises that those two functions work much more closely together. They have a single source of truth in terms of a set of analytics. Because if you want to get ahead of a reputation risk, usually it's starting in an operational risk. And essentially we're looking at those risks coming from anywhere, but I mean, they could be product risks, they could be consumer activism risks, they could be governance risks. So if you have a capability to identify where those early risk signals are coming from, you're likely to get ahead of a reputation risk that could well be maturing into the reputation crisis of next week. So we feel that there's a lot of value in companies collaborating across risk and reputation. And we feel that to do that, they have to have this single source of truth, this set of analytics that both sides of that equation are able to draw from, so that they can become much more proactive and collaborative together.
Yeah, I think you just beautifully articulated why it is a must-have in today's world to have those external risk sources and really include those data points when considering your entire risk management strategy.
Yeah, I mean, we see in terms of the evolution of risk signals, I mean, clearly the market started, way back in Enron 2001. Then obviously Sarbanes-Oxley, and we feel that the credit crunch, the credit crisis, enabled the implementation of let's say the 3 lines of defense models. They were adopted, they were promoted and adopted by many regulators, particularly in the financial market. So you had these frameworks that were really focused on more of a compliance-centric approach and less of a continuous risk approach. And so currently, companies are the risk owners in companies are actually the busiest people in the companies. They actually are the functional leads in terms of the first line of defense. And in some cases, they have really good tools. In some silos, I mean, cyber is very sophisticated in terms of the surveillance capabilities. Supply chain analysis and procurement has lots of tools, but it's quite fragmented and spotty. And what we feel is that there's an opportunity and a need to enable at an enterprise level a company to essentially assess across all of those risks, across all of those silos. How is it stacking up? What's its risk profile? Where is it strong? Where is it weak? And how dynamic? And how are those emerging risks, maturing? And in the operating environment, they mature and move incredibly quickly. And it's so difficult for these companies who are global and have operations all over the world to keep track of not just operations risk, but also, how the regulators are leaning into certain risk categories and product features and things. So it's difficult at the enterprise level for these teams to get their hands around the risk, the entirety of their risks. And that's really where we feel that, new tools can help.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you bring up Enron, and you think about Enron WorldCom scandals, and we saw, of course, SOX come out of those scandals. But even before I started working in this field, in this discipline, if you had said Enron to me, like, my focus is on the damage to that organization's reputation. Like, that is, Enron is is something you don't recover from, that level of fraud and corruption, and ditto to WorldCom. The brand is forever tainted by that. Even 25-ish years later, you say Enron to anyone old enough to remember that time, the impression is not good. And so to see reputation evolve as a measurable and analytical risk domain is just, I think it's fascinating. Love to see it. Let's maybe move on to our next question here, because I want to kind of continue this conversation about the challenges that enterprise risk managers are facing today. And you co-authored this white paper, Wake Up Call for Enterprise Risk, How AI Can Transform ERM. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and some of the takeaways from that white paper and the challenges facing managers.
Yeah. I mean, we worked with a big international consulting firm to conduct a lot of proprietary and primary research. So we talked to a lot of CRAs and CRA teams in global enterprises. The backdrop clearly is a more volatile external operating environment, greater volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and big ambiguity, the VUCA framework. I think 85% of large enterprises have had a substantial external shock in the last 3 years, and yet only 60% of those enterprises, essentially at a board level and a risk committee level, assess their risks more than biannually. So you've got this disconnect between the pace of change in the external operating environment and the assessment of risk and the insights that key decision makers have at a board level and a risk committee level. And so the research that we conducted clearly outlined essentially four issues that at an enterprise level, the enterprise risk teams, they're struggling. And essentially the first issue is that they're completely under-resourced. Interestingly, if a company has had a major global scandal, we found that actually in those companies, they did have quite a lot of people in their risk teams that had obviously, learned the lessons. But broadly speaking, the size of these risk teams in global enterprises are comparatively small, given the size of the challenges that they face. And then the second challenge that they have is that there's a reliance on ad hoc manual research. The maturity level in certain silos and certain risk categories that we've talked about, cyber and procurement, is actually higher than at an enterprise level. And so they're completely struggling with slow, laborious, manual data. Even the most sophisticated companies, who are incredibly sophisticated marketing-led companies, they have this ERM teams that simply are struggling with manual processes. The third element is that, and it's very much related to the second, is that the data that they're reliant on is usually geographically skewed. They can only process really what they can access. So immediately for a global company where you might have risks, external risks, signals emanating in media that is not in English, in a local language, in a local market that's not necessarily in their maybe top 5 markets, but can still, emerge to impact and indeed drive a level of contagion across their markets. But there's a real problem in terms of, geographically market skewed data. And then the fourth problem, unsurprisingly, given the other three, is the data becomes outdated very quickly. So of course, the reports that go to the risk committees, the data that's presented to the risk owners is outdated, lacking, it's skewed, has an internal bias, and so it's really not sufficient. It's not sort of sufficient quality, breadth, and depth to really enable ERM teams to do their job, particularly in this very hostile environment. So those really were the key findings, and of course the opportunity to provide insights that help these ERM teams, both saving time to process the data, finding the signals in the noise, and then providing dashboards that enables them to at a point of need present today's picture, this hour's picture on a global basis of their risk profile is a great opportunity for those companies that can deliver applied AI solutions in this space.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, it's in line with what we see a lot on the market with how can we best utilize AI to improve our business processes and make our workers and tools more efficient. And you did already kind of talk about this with your response to the previous question. But, are there other specific advantages to having AI-powered external intelligence compared to the traditional risk monitoring approaches? Or do you anticipate or forecast new emerging use cases for AI-powered intelligence that maybe we could look to see on the market in a year or two?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there isn't a better time in history to apply these new technologies. Both, and we use the dual set of discriminative AI, so really finding these weak signals in the billions of information that we take down. We take down 6 million items a day and find these using classic discriminative. But then, of course, the ability then to overlay that with generative AI is fantastic to ensure that there's a level of synthesis and scale to deliver these new intelligence. I mean, I think these tools need to do a series of things. Provide the risk professionals with very much some standard reporting frameworks, be they radar charts, be they risk matrix, be they heat maps, developing and presenting data in a way that's different to how communication professionals absorb and digest data. We're more interested in providing the evidence of a risk event that's happened, not necessarily a discussion about a brand or a company, where it's much more granular. And critically, with these new tools, risk professionals have to be able to validate the signal, and they have to be able to feel confident that this is actually a validated signal, access the underlying story and the issue, and then that gives them the confidence to essentially take the data, either report it to risk committees in a way that risk committees can digest in the matrix and the heat maps, or indeed challenge and collaborate with the risk owners with some verified and validated data in order to drive some mitigation strategies. So yeah, we see that the discipline of presenting data in a way that's in some standard frameworks that risk professionals can absorb is really critical. And then, of course, in terms of how these tools are going to evolve, the agentic technologies are going to be incredibly powerful to just further scale the ability to report quickly and also report on an ongoing basis in a role-based application. So the head of legal will have the legal view of risk as well as the enterprise risk, so all of the risk community will have agents that essentially report on their specific risks, as well as bring that level of collaboration, that collaboration to bear. And then the final thing where we see a lot of development is developing predictive and descriptive signals. So predictive is critical, because really the risk insight that's the most important is not what's happening today, but what's likely to happen tomorrow or next week. So at Signal, we're developing some very interesting predictive capabilities, and that really will enable these ERM professionals at an enterprise level to get ahead in terms of, proactively mitigating based on, good quality forecast predictive data.
Yeah, and I think that in particular is what I'm so excited to see come out. Like we talked about earlier, one of the challenges with taking in data and using it to assess risk is it's out of date almost immediately. And so being able to forecast anticipated future risks using that data so that you can get ahead of those risks before they become really damaging or unmanageable will be really critical. And those are the types of things that I'm just so excited to see develop and evolve across the risk management landscape.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly, one of the things about risks is because they're so dynamic and they category jump. So, something that started in there are many examples. The not so recent Boeing 737 example is a classic, where actually the initial risk was a product failure, but actually that category jumped into operational quality, into an ethical story, and ultimately into a governance story. And so understanding these causal chains across risk categories, and of course being able to predict how certain risk events could metastasize into other categories, is an incredibly powerful capability and set of insights for enterprise risk managers, because they can obviously collaborate before time, they can invest and accelerate in mitigation and communications before time, before things get out of whack, and a real crisis is on their hands. And we feel that there's huge amounts of value in applying predictive with understanding blast radius and the causal chains across risk categories, and that will really help companies. Because stepping back, ultimately risk and managing risk in this volatile external operating environment is a new form of competitive advantage. If global public companies are able to reduce their risks, become a more stable stock, less volatile, less buffeted by events, be they grey swans or be they normal swans, or indeed better resilient against the black swan events, they're going to be a better company. And it really, I think risk professionals have always been on the back foot as a defensive, as a cost, but actually we see them as a new form of competitive advantage. Because if you've got a better risk profile than your competitors, your investors are going to love you.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I wonder, with this type of risk software, are there any other specific features on the market with these products today that people who are interested in learning a little bit more about this type of solution would expect to see that are a little bit different from maybe how we've traditionally thought about risk management tools?
Yeah, I think clearly we've touched on GRC tools, which are very much workflow tools. And some of those tools do have external data sets, particularly around regulatory risk. But we see very much a trend where these platforms will have integrations for external risk signals, because those more traditional and much more established tools need a 360 view of risk. They need the internal perspective and all of the workflow and the data, but they also need the external dynamism, because that drives the internal workflow. So we see that developing very quickly and maturing as these GRC platforms are going just start to focus more on continuous risk management, not just on compliance of certain policies and regulations. And we see that as a strong trend in the market. But we also see direct dashboards and also mobile access to for C-suite for senior executives, particularly around the agentic reports and accessing those on mobile. We see that as a trend as well, because the democratization of these risk intelligence across the organization can't happen quickly enough. Everyone needs to have this same single source of truth of where their organization sits for any risk category and how that can be mitigated if required.
Yeah, that's great. And for those watching who are familiar with G2 categories, you may recall that we have a list of inclusion criteria, a set of features that are required from a product to be able to be listed in a category. And so when that goes live next week, you'll find a lot of these features on that list. And thank you again to Signal AI for helping us curate that list and make sure that it's accurate and reflective of this type of market today. I know we're, coming up on time, but I wonder if you could give a quick 60-second real-world example of how an organization transformed from being reactive to proactive in their risk management using external.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think doing a lot of work with a major mining and minerals company, really understanding their operational risks in certain markets, how they are being amplified by consumer activists, and how that is triggering regulation and regulators to lean in and particularly investigate /fine. So getting ahead of those risks at birth, addressing the problem in a way and working with the activists is an example. Likewise, ingredients risk for major FMCG producers, looking at industry trends and events around certain ingredients in certain markets, ensuring that those are identified so that they are unlikely, or at least there's a level of surveillance, so that when it comes down to a company or a product level, they're well armed in terms of addressing those. And the list goes on. In the tech sector, exploding battery packs in China, that causes huge amounts of consumer activism. And sure enough, that is a contagion issue in the US as supply chains link one market to another. So it's industry agnostic, and it's all about speed to identification to help our clients mitigate and just get them empowered to be proactive, not reactive.
That's incredible. I know we're at time. Chris, thank you so much.
Not at all.
For those watching, we do have some additional resources for further reading. We already have a link to the white paper that Chris co-authored in the chat here. We'll pop a few more links in the chat here. Thank you, my G2 colleagues, for those. So takeaways: new risk intelligence category live on G2 next week. And then if you want to keep digging into this type of solution, we have a lot of resources from our friends at Signal AI to help you learn more. So thank you to Chris again, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been great.
Bye now.